Good evening. I'm Maryam Alavi, Dean of the Georgia Tech Scheller College of Business. Thank you for joining us for our first presentation in the Dean's Speaker Series on diversity, equity, and inclusion for this year. It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome tonight's distinguished speaker and my friend, Shan Cooper. Shan is Executive Director for the Atlanta Committee for Progress. She has graciously accepted our invitation to discuss creating a community where we all excel and the role of the Atlanta Community for Progress in our local community and beyond. The Atlanta Committee for Progress was founded in 2003. Their mission is to provide leadership on key issues important to economic growth and inclusion for all citizens in the city of Atlanta. Shan is the former Chief Transformation Officer of West Rock and was responsible for the recycling and waste services, procurement, enterprise logistics, and information technology. Prior to joining West Rock, Shan served as Vice President and General Manager of Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Company. In that role, she was responsible for the 6,000 employee operations in Marietta, Georgia, Meridian, Mississippi, and Clarksburg, West Virginia. Shan was named Georgia Trend Magazine's 2015 Most Respected Business Leader, the 2015 Women of the Year by the American Association of University Women, and as one of Georgia Trend Magazine's most influential Georgians in 2012 through 2016, and again in 2020 and 2021. She was also named one of Black Enterprise Magazine's most powerful executives in corporate America in 2017. Shan serves on the board of directors of several for- and nonprofit organizations, including Georgia Power Company, Intercontinental Exchange Incorporated, and Veritiv Corporation. In the nonprofit area, Shan serves on the board of directors for Grady Health Systems and the board of trustees of Emory University and the board of Georgia Tech Research Institute. Shan is a member of the Atlanta Rotary Club and a life member of the Board of Counselors for the Carter Center. Shan earned a bachelor's degree in biology and religion and a Master of Business Administration from Emory University. Shan, thank you for your time today. I can only imagine the demands on your schedule and the amount of work that goes into driving the success of the Atlanta Committee for Progress. After we hear from you, we will open it to the audience for their questions. To those in the audience, please submit your questions through the Q&A feature on the right side of your screen, and Shan will address questions as time permits. Shan, welcome again, and take it away.
Great, thank you, Maryam. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you this afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here to talk about one of my favorite subjects, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also to talk to you about how the Atlanta Committee for Progress, how we are hoping to be able to address this work on a very broad scale. And so when I thought about my topic for tonight, creating a community where we all excel, I think as you hear me talk about the work that we're trying to do at the Atlanta Committee for Progress, it'll help you understand why I chose this topic. And I'll start by telling you up front, this is a call to action. You're going to understand why. All of you now are studying at this wonderful institution, Georgia Tech, and there at the business school with my favorite dean. And but I think you're in a prime position at a great institution where you're going to be learning how to problem solve. And I think for many of the problems and the challenges that we face here in Atlanta, it's going to be you all that really will work to bring the solution. So let me start by first talking about, and I'll talk tonight about the Atlanta Committee for Progress, but I'll also talk to you about my own life and how I believe that the work around equity has aided me in terms of being successful, and why this work is so important to me as a result of that. And I'm also happy to talk about my time and my tenure both at Lockheed Martin as well at Westrock. So let's jump right in. Let's start to talk about the Atlanta Committee for Progress and how I actually became the executive director for this role. I was actually retired, had retired from Westrock and was enjoying my life on the beach when I got this call. And it was from the members of the executive committee for the Atlanta Committee for Progress. And they began to talk to me about the work that they wanted to do in the city of Atlanta. As the ACP, and I'll refer to it from here on out as the ACP, we serve as the mayor's cabinet. Doesn't matter who the mayor is for the city of Atlanta. We just want to ensure that Atlanta continues to be a thriving and growing city. And during this conversation, my initial reaction was, oh, no, I'm at the beach. I'm having a great time. I think I'm going to pass on this opportunity. But then they sent me some data, and I'm going to share some of that data with you this evening. But the one data point that got me to say I've got to get back to work was the fact that if you are a child born in the city of Atlanta, if you're born here and you're impoverished, you have a 4.8% chance of getting out of poverty unless something is done specifically and intentionally to impact your life. So I couldn't hear this statistic, right, and hear about these poor children who needed my help, who I felt like I could actually do something for and support. I couldn't stand on the sidelines any longer. So hearing that one statistic brought me from the beach and into the executive leadership role today for the Atlanta Committee for Progress. As we sat around the table in Atlanta, and we had the opportunity to work with McKinsey Consultant, and we had asked McKinsey to do a study for us to tell us what does Atlanta look and feel like from a demographics perspective, from an economic development, economic mobility perspective. And we were surprised to hear that we are one of the poorest cities in the country. And that was shocking for us. But it was also disappointing for us because we couldn't understand it. Here we were, we thought as companies, we were giving in the philanthropic space, we were trying to support education, we were trying to support, neighborhoods and housing and all these wonderful efforts, but we weren't moving the needle as a city. And so we became very concerned about that. And so we asked McKinsey to do some additional work for us. Tell us a little bit more. If we're going to change the trajectory of the city, if we're going to create this community where everybody around the table gets to participate, everybody gets an equal opportunity for success, then what is it that we need to be doing differently? And McKinsey identified, and you probably already know these things, but there are probably about 6 areas they talk with us about. They said if you can put some energy and focus around these areas, then we believe that Atlanta can be repositioned as a city and not be at the bottom of the list in terms of the lack of economic mobility in our city. And so I want to share with you some additional data points because I think this will get you to understand why it became very important to us. So those 6 areas were around culture, the culture of the city. Think about Atlanta. We're known as the birthplace of the civil rights movement, right? We're known as a city too busy to hate. But then all of a sudden, the protests happened last year. The social unrest happens last year. And it caused us to step back and to really talk about the culture of the city. We believe that we are a city that's steeped in awareness and respect for all cultures and all people. But are we really? So culture was an area. Education, health and wellness, neighborhoods and housing, wealth creation, and finally criminal justice reform. Those were the areas that McKinsey said to us as a committee, if you all can put together strategies around these areas, then we believe that Atlanta can have a different reputation as relates to economic mobility. Now, taking all of that together, it became overwhelming, as you might imagine, because that's a lot. But let me share with you some of the data. Now, you have to keep in mind that about 52% of Atlanta's population is actually Black, is actually African American and Black. Let me read some of this to you. So as it relates to wealth creation, the Black unemployment rate in Atlanta at the time of this report was more than 5 times that of the white population. Education. Black students comprise 37% of Georgia's K-12 public school students, but make up 67% of the students suspended or expelled. Health and wellness. The life expectancy in Buckhead is 25 years longer than that of those folks who live on the west side of Atlanta. Just a few more. 50% of low income and 42% of families of color lack devices at their homes to access distant learning. Think about that during the time of a pandemic. Just a few more. Around health and wellness, food insecurity, significant in the communities of color. Black people, Latinos, and Asian Americans experience 66% more pollution from particulate matter than the white population. So think about that. Where are our communities living? This data was causing us to ask all of these really, really hard and significant questions. A few more. Only 70% of white Georgians today earn a living wage. So we talk about our poverty position. Now in the city, of course, it's worse for the city of Atlanta, but think about the state of Georgia. Think about that. Black unemployment rate has been consistently twice that of white people since the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics began collecting that data in 1972. Think about that. Think about how long that has been a challenge for our communities. So as I began to talk with the members of the Atlanta Committee for Progress, and we began to look around the table and say, gosh, we're business leaders, right? We are educators in terms of university presidents. We are civic leaders. What is it that we can possibly do that would have a real impact to start to move people through this thing we call life, right? And what we recognize is that we may not be able to address all of these things, but there were a few things that we could do, and that's what we sought to do. The first thing we talked about was, placing people into living wage jobs. We understood from the research that McKinsey did, if you could do that, then you could really change the trajectory of people's lives. You could really begin to move people out of poverty, begin to allow them to be in a position where they could afford housing, and it would impacting our homelessness numbers and things like that. And so we decided our first point of business was going to be workforce development, because we had jobs that we could place our citizens into working. And so we started off with five companies and 3 areas. We wanted to hire in areas of IT, information technology, aerospace. Think about Delta, and at that time, this was pre-pandemic, the growth they had on their minds there, and then the skilled trades. How often do you have to struggle to find a good plumber, right, or a good electrician? If you're at my house, it's hard to find those skills. And so we thought if we can place people in those jobs, and we had wonderful leaders step up. So the skilled trade space, we had Paul Bowers at Georgia Power and Craig Manier at Home Depot say, we're going to own this space. Again, for aviation, avionics, Ed Bastian saying, we're going to own this space. And then for IT, there was Truist there, Bill Rogers, and ICE, Intercontinental Exchange. These were leaders who were committed to saying, we're going to invest. We're going to invest not only just our treasure, but also our time and our talent. We have our people come together, our employees come together to work with people in community to ensure they're ready for these jobs. And so that's just one example of the things we've been trying to do as ACP, again, to create a community where everyone gets a seat at the table, where everyone gets to participate. Now, what we recognize in all of this is that these are issues that don't get solved overnight. But we recognize we had to put a long-term strategic plan in place, that we have to continue to invest in it year after year, and that we have to ensure that we've got the right experts helping to make this vision happen. And so we actually stood up, which if you guys have heard of the West Side Future Fund, that is the work that came out of the ACP. The initial investment in terms of connecting people, the initial investment for the Atlanta Beltline, which we all get to enjoy, that initial investment came out of the ACP. So it was looking at things that we could do that would create and build community. Now, those are things that, again, will take time. But I think it's also going to take all of us thinking about how we can have an impact. So I'll share with you my own personal story and why this work was so important to me. When I heard that statistic around this, children being, having a 4.8% chance of getting out of poverty, it did make me think about my own life, because I grew up in a small town in Alabama, in a fairly poor family. My dad was a pastor, and my mom and my dad was a pastor at the same time. He retired from Ace Hardware. My mom retired from Walmart, so I'm a huge Walmart fan to this very day because Walmart allowed me to get an education. But what I loved about my upbringing was that education was always at the forefront of what my parents talked about. We didn't know how I was going to get to college, if I'd ever even be able to afford to go to college, but they talked to me about college. I'd never been to a college campus before I came to Emory. And so I got accepted to Emory. But let me tell you, because people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when you're going into an institution or to a new setting, a new space, it's so important that you feel like you belong there, right? And so what Emory recognized, I was the first person in my family to go to college. They recognized that my coming on campus for the first time as a freshman was probably going to be challenging for me. And so here is what equity does. Equity looks like this. What Emory did was I came to a pre-summer program that gave me an opportunity, one, to get used to the campus, get used to being away from home, to interact with current students so I'd understand what college life was about and how I'd have to manage my own time now. Many of you are dealing with that now, right? You had to learn how to do that. And but that's what equity looked. Now, equity didn't go in my class for me. I wish it had, or take my, my quantum chem, exams, whatever. I had to do that. But equity allowed me to have a level playing field, put me in a position where I could compete, work hard, and get an education. And that's what I believe when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion today, particularly within organizations. I believe that's what people are looking for. They're not looking for a handout or what have you. And even when I'm working in communities, I love being out in community, talking to the citizens of Atlanta. And what they've often shared with me is like, Shan, you know what? We just want access. We just want an opportunity to be able to have access to certain things. People in the way, I can tell you, people in our communities, they're smart, they're industrious, they want to work hard, but sometimes there is something that happens in life that doesn't facilitate or allow that. And so when I talk about our all coming together to create this community, it's about us all thinking about what can we do that can help. For me, once I was able to, of course, graduate and join a wonderful organization, which I'm sure many of you will do, then that was my commitment. I was going to pay it forward. I was going to pull somebody along with me. And since I've been working in the workforce, my husband and I we've just committed to in our families, right? Just saying, look, there's somebody in our family who wants a college education, we're willing to pay for that. That's how important education was in my life. That's the difference that it made for me. And I know it'll make a difference for someone else. And so, but how do we as individuals, right, have an impact? Because sometimes people will look at these issues and they'll say, gosh, that's just too big. Homelessness is too big. Not having access to quality education is too big. The K through 12 system is just too big. How do we fix this? Well, I would tell you that it's one, by getting involved, by finding your passion, the work that you enjoy doing, getting involved, and then, sometimes it requires a coalition, joining with a few friends, but then decide how you're going to help, decide what you're going to do. And sometimes it just may be going to the Atlanta Food Bank on a weekend, right, and providing food for residents. It might be just that simple. And it sounds simple, but it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. I'll tell you, during my tenure at Lockheed Martin, I did have an opportunity to serve as the head of diversity and inclusion for that corporation. And it was at a time when I'll tell you that the predominantly our leadership were predominantly white males. It was at a time when engineering was not, cool at that time for many women, from their perspective, for many girls, right, in schools, what have you. But we took on the challenge saying, we're going to change the trajectory of the face of our workforce, the face of our leadership. We're going to create an environment where people want to come here. Not only do they want to come work here, but they want to come here and stay because they can bring their full self, who they are, to the workplace. And I would often, tell people my story. I'm a pastor's kid, grew up in small town Alabama. Came to Emory, got an education there. landed in a wonderful business school where I could study business or what have you. That was not my original plan. My original plan was I was going to go to medical school. But working through that process, the wonderful people that I met, the wonderful mentors that I met along the way. Remember, I grew up in a home where I didn't know about corporate America or even how to work in corporate America, but I had great mentors along the way, great sponsors along the way. And so I would often tell people during that process, it was a growth process for me, but I always felt like it was a place where I could belong, right? That what I brought to the table may have been different, but it was the collective diversity of all of us coming together that made Lockheed Martin great. That was where the innovation came from, right? That was where the revenue growth came from. That was where the ideas and the ideation and all the things that we were able to do as a company, it came from individual people from diverse backgrounds coming together with a common purpose, unity of purpose, people who were resilient, right? And so it wasn't that my journey in corporate America wasn't easy. Of course, but again, I was able to sustain and survive because there was a network there. There was a sense again of belonging that allowed me to thrive and bring my best to the table. And so when we talk about the work that I get to do every day, that's why I'm so passionate about it. That's why, because I understand getting an education was a differentiator for me, and not just for me, but for my family, for generations to come, because now I can pay it forward. And I understand that as I look to the future, and I look at those of you who are studying today, great problem solvers, when I think about the inequities that exist amongst the racial inequities that exist, I'm grateful that you all are talking about it. Because if we don't talk about it, then we can't solve it. And so I was so delighted when Miriam talked about what she wanted to do with this series. I just regret that we can't be together. So this is such a sensitive topic, but I think we got to talk about race. I think talk about the things that make us different, but talk more about the things that make us, that we have in common, the things that we have in common. I was on a call earlier today with a couple of CEOs. We were talking about country is going to be 250 years old here in a few years. I think it's 2026. What will we be saying about who we are as a country? Will we still have the social unrest that we talk about today? Will we still have the racial inequities that we have in the country today? We talked a lot today about our democracy and what that means. But at all levels, I think, of the country, people are beginning to talk about the topic of diversity, inclusion, and equity, and the power of it all. The power of it all. So I think sometimes we forget that. But we had an hour conversation where we just talked about that. We just talked about what has made the country great the past 250 years, and what is it going to take to get us through the next 250. But it all came back to people. It all came back to the diversity of our country. It all came back to the diversity of our people that drove innovation in our country, that made us the country that we are today. But what I loved about that conversation, and there were points that we didn't all agree, but what I loved about it is we were able to talk about it. We were able to ask each other questions. But we were able to have those conversations, and I think that's what's going to take. So that's why I'm so excited about this leadership series, because you all get to start now early in your career journey, in your education journey, to begin to talk about these things. And I think it'll be this generation here that solved a lot of the issues that we have not been able to solve to date as it relates to inequity. I've talked a lot there. I want to hopefully hear from some of you. And I think I see the names down here. So I think I may be able to ask you some questions if you don't ask me questions. So watch out. But I'm happy to talk about, again, my journey, my career journey, my views on equity and diversity, and even more so around this community that we're trying to create here in Atlanta. I'll share one more thing, and I love this work, but I get a chance to also work with Dan Cathy. Many of you know Dan is the CEO for Chick-fil-A. And Arthur Blank. Arthur Blank does not need an introduction when you look at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. But these are two gentlemen who actually came together with me and asked me to lead some work around creating the beloved community. How do we start to do that? And we're doing that on the West Side. We're trying it. We're trying our very best to create that community that Dr. King talked about. where there wouldn't be any of these schisms, whether it's racism or sexism or any of these things that divide us. But we'd be a community based upon love. We'd help our fellow man. We'd come together to do that. And so we're working on that project as well. And so there are leaders here in our community that really want to have an impact, that really want to make a difference. But it's going to take all of us, me, you, all of us, to get this work done. But I believe if any city is able to get it done, it will be the city of Atlanta, because we know what it's like to come together and create greatness for everybody that's involved. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions out there.
Thank you for that inspiring talk. We really appreciate it. We have some questions, and the first one asks if you could share the 6 focus areas from the McKinsey studies. Repeat that, please.
I sure will. I'm glad you're asking. So the 6 areas: culture, the culture of the city of Atlanta, education, health and wellness, neighborhoods and housing, wealth creation, and criminal justice reform. And again, based upon the McKinsey work, what they've said to us, if we can find ways to significantly impact those 6 areas, we will change the economic mobility picture for the city of Atlanta. We'll also change and address the inequities that also exist for its citizens. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question: how do you believe companies should hold leadership accountable for making DE&I a priority within their scope of authority?
Great question. I'll tell you how we did it when I was at Lockheed Martin. I was running diversity. I worked for a wonderful CEO. Bob Stevens was the CEO at that time. And Bob actually made it a part of our bonus system. So when you tie things to leaders' compensation, it's amazing how they pay attention. And we didn't do that in just a punitive way. So we developed, and you all will love this as Georgia Tech students, we developed what we called the diversity maturity model. On a scale of 1 to 5, each of our business units were assessed by an independent assessor. And there were 3 components to it. One, of course, you can't talk about diversity, right, and not talk about representation. And so we looked across our workforce and recognized the majority of our workforce were white males. There was a reason for that, right? Most of our leaders at that time, most of the people who worked for the company had actually been former military. If you looked at the military at that time, again, when people came into the company, that was the makeup of the military. But we knew we had to do more, and we did do more. And so we looked at representation, because we knew that was going to be the measuring stick for our employees, because people were going to look at what they could see. And people desperately wanted to see people that looked like them. And that was important to us. So by the time I left the role, Lockheed Martin was 4 divisions. 3 of the 4 divisions were led by women, unheard of in the aerospace and defense industry at that time. But again, these were not women. They were not women because they were not there because they were tokens. They were there because they earned the seat. They were smart, they were sharp, and they knew how to run a business. But that was important to us, that people had an equal opportunity to compete. So we looked at representation. We also looked at things like the environment, the culture, right? Because what I believe is you could absolutely recruit every woman on the planet, every person of color on the planet, every white male on the planet. But if the environment was not one where they felt they could actually flourish and bring their full selves to the workplace, they weren't going to stay. And so for some of our communities, particularly in the African American community, we had a real hard time with retention. And so we sought to understand that. And so we measured across many, many different things, but we also did an employee survey. We felt like we weren't not going to be the culture or the company that we wanted to be until our employees told us that we were. And so we did a lot of surveying to understand that. But with that came a nice little score that each of our business units received, and that their score determined whether or not they were going to have a higher level of bonus or a lower level of bonus. And so you have to drive accountability that way, and that's what I've seen that has worked in the past. And I hope
Thank you. Thank you. Can you share your thoughts on what seems to be a hot topic right now on how we open the top of the recruitment funnel to potentially include second chance hiring for candidates with criminal records?
Yeah, that's an area that we have been talking about as well. And so I think what companies have to do, some of the companies, I'll tell you, many of the ACP member companies have done this. They've gone back to look at their policies, right? There are going to be some companies, depending on their work, where they're not going to be open, probably someone who has a criminal history, right? But there are other companies who went back and looked at their policies and say, you know what, are we creating, unnecessary barriers? And they looked at their policies and they are able to bring, to hire people in who have a past criminal record. And I think also working with the court system, right, to understand that there are some things that don't need to be with the person forever. So there are organizations, and I'm trying to think of the one, it slips my mind now, but there are organizations, nonprofits, who that's what they do. They work with the court system, the judicial systems to say, these individuals need a second chance, right? When you have a criminal record, it impacts so many other things that people don't think about. It impacts your ability to get housing, for example, right? It impacts your ability to get a job. Well, if you can't get a job, you can't get housing, then that impacts the homelessness situation, right? So all these things that we're dealing with, in many ways, they're interdependent. But that is, so supporting those organizations, those nonprofit organizations whose mission is, again, to work with the judicial system to say, some of these records needs to be expunged, right? How can we move that along? And they're doing great work there. But I think companies have to go back, working with your HR leaders and your legal organizations, and look at your policies and to really understand why. And are all of your jobs such that you couldn't hire someone who had a past record, right? And that's what companies are doing. And that's what I would encourage all companies to do. And again, there are going to be some companies that say, gosh, Shan, we just can't do it, right? Or we just can't do it because of these reasons. But other companies, as they've gone to look back, they come back and say, you know what, we possibly can be a little bit more lenient and really have a policy that maybe not be all-encompassing, but maybe work with some parts of what we're doing. There's also organizations. There's an organization called CEO, and I won't remember the acronym, but they're new to Atlanta. But they're coming in, and that's what they do. They take those folks who are coming out of the prison system, and they train them on how to do an effective interview, how to write an effective resume. They actually get them jobs with companies who are willing to come on to be partners with them to help them with their housing situation. They help them ensure they've got transportation. Transportation also becomes a barrier, believe it or not, to people who've had a past record. But we've got to get beyond this. And I think the companies who are assessing those things now are doing the right things, looking at their policies to be sure that they're not setting what I would call false barriers.
Thank you. The next question is this. What do you foresee for the future of corporate DE&I, and what role do you think individuals play in that future?
Yes. I really hope that one day we are in a situation where we're not even having to talk about DE&I. I was doing the diversity work 20 years ago, and here we are again. And I've had colleagues and mentors tell me, well, Shan, I was doing that work, 10, 15, 20 years before you were even doing it. But at what point do we get to a space where we're not having to talk about diversity and inclusion, that it just is, right? I look forward to the day when people aren't, calling me to speak because I'm a woman who loves and who's been in manufacturing, right? Because it's just not a big deal anymore, right? And so that's the future that I hope for, that we reach a point where there's equity, whether it's in compensation, there's equity in promotion and advancement, there's equity in our hiring, there's equity in our ability for those small businesses who need business, that there's equity in all that, so we're not even having to have the person who has a D&I role, or not even having the topic. But I think for us to get there, now here comes the hard part, is that we're going to have to talk about the ugly stuff that nobody wants to talk about. That was the one area that I have to applaud Lockheed Martin for, because we got there, right? We got there. We were able to talk about the things that make us different, but focus more so on the things that brought us together, that made us common, right? And so we're going to have to talk about race. We're going to have to talk about that. We're going to have to talk about slavery. We're going to have to talk about, the LGBTQ community. We're going to talk about religion, our beliefs, how we view the world. And we found a way to do that at Lockheed Martin. Now, initially, it was hard. It was uncomfortable. People were emotional, and that's okay. But I think until we can talk about it, ask questions about it, we're not going to be able to solve the issue. And I'll give you a couple examples. So I once had a young lady. We were in a train. Actually, matter of fact, part of our training was we worked with a company called White Males School Diversity Partners, but part of the training was just talking and getting to know each other, right? So I once had a young lady ask me, she said, Shan, I don't understand, how do, some black women, come to work on Monday, they've got short hair, and on Wednesday, they've got really long hair. I don't understand that, right? Well, that wasn't anything for me to be upset about. That was just a teachable moment. This person really had a curiosity. And so how do we give each other grace, right? Grace that allows us to ask each other questions and have those conversations. I can remember I was at a training course. This is when I was in human resources before I transitioned to operations. I was on a training course, several other men in the course, and typically in Lockheed Martin, I was the only woman in most settings, and I was also typically the only person of color in most settings, but that was okay, right? But I remember going to this training class, and the instructor was up. We had a break, and the facility was new to me, and I just got lost. And the one thing I hate is being late. So I was late getting back from the break at training. And an older gentleman in the room, he's probably in his, I would say 70s at least. And I said to the instructor, I'm so sorry, I'm late. I couldn't find the restroom. And his comment was, well, that's because that's because women should be at home, or something to that regard. And I didn't get upset with that. Now I thought the instructor was going to pass out, because the instructor knew I was from HR and I could fire this person. But I chose to make that a teachable moment. So I just asked the gentleman, do you have a wife? Do you have daughters? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, well, wouldn't you want them to be able to find the restroom? And he said yes. And I said, do they work? And so I just started asking him questions about his own family, right? And then he began to realize, okay, that probably wasn't a good joke for me to tell, right? And he apologized. So sometimes you just have to make it a teachable moment. And I do tend to do that by asking questions back to get people to think about what they're saying and what they're doing. You just answer the question, right? Because people are curious. But you give people grace. And until we can give each other grace, I think it's going to be hard for us to have those hard conversations that we need to have, right? I had one person say to me, Caucasian gentleman, said to me, Shan, I don't know why we keep talking about slavery when I had nothing to do with that. That was my ancestors. That's not me today. Why do you all keep bringing it up? And I had to explain to him, well, this is why we keep bringing it up. For me, slavery is a part of my history. And when you want to do away with it and you don't want to talk about it, it makes me feel like it's not important to you. It's not important, but it is important to me. The resilience that I have today, the hard work ethic that I have today came from my ancestors. And so I'm not blaming you, but what I'm saying to you is that we got to talk about it. You can't erase history. It happened. It occurred, right? But where do we go from here to ensure it doesn't happen again? And what do we learn from that? And so I think, again, those are the conversations that we're going to have to be able to have in a setting, talking to each other and not becoming offended, but really having hard, candid conversation, but listening. Not defending, but listening. And so that's what I think is going to have to happen. And until that can happen, I think we're going to continue to be talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for years to come until we can do that. And I think, again, as I said earlier, it will be this generation, not my generation. I don't think my generation will get there in the pace, at the pace that we need to get there. I think it'll be this generation today. I don't know if we call them millennials today, or if there's a new name or what have you, but it will be that generation that will be willing to say, okay, let's talk about this, because they're not going to have all the baggage and all the things that so many of us have, right? It's just part of our experience. And so I think we just have to be able to talk about these things. And I think it'll be this millennial generation that will get us there.
Okay, thank you. Talking about generational mobility specifically, and that 4.8% statistic, what do you think are the major factors preventing kids from getting out of poverty as they grow up?
Right. Oh, that's a full question. So sometimes, let me tell you, it's a complement of things. Many children, many of these children that we're talking about, that we're trying to support and help, are being raised in single-family homes. Mom is working 3-4 jobs, just trying to keep food on the table. So little Shan, little Billy, little what have you, does not, get the educational support in terms of what's needed. And so I'll give you my own example. My mom would always say to us, please don't have me have to come to the school because you've been misbehaving. If I have to come to the school, then I don't get paid, and something doesn't. And I came. My dad was always with us, right? But for both of them, if they had to stop and get off work, leave their jobs, come to the school to do anything with us, that was money that wasn't going to come into the house, right? They weren't on salary jobs; they were on hourly jobs. And so I think we've got to step back and think about the family life that these children are growing up in. Many of these children, again, it goes back to that health and wellness, right, have health conditions. And why is that? Because mom didn't have access to great health care when she was pregnant, right? And so now they're born and they've got additional health care challenges. And so there's a whole slew of things. Some of these children, again, are homeless, right? And so the 6 things that I talked to you about earlier are the areas that I think we've got to somehow find strategies around that we can bring solutions to many of these things. I'm excited because I know that Miriam and Angel, the president of Georgia Tech, that one of their initiatives around how do we leverage technology to address the human condition. I am excited about that work, and I can't wait to see what you all there at Georgia Tech is going to come up with, because I do think some of these solutions will be technology-based solutions. But it's the simple things that we often forget. And I'll go back to, one of the things that I often tell people, transportation, right? If my car breaks down today, I have a second car in the garage, right? That is not the case for the children that we're talking about here. These children this year had to learn from home. You would be amazed at the number of children. Once Atlanta public school system had to shut down, Dr. Heron would tell you she didn't hear from those kids again until, that was in March. She didn't hear from those kids again until the fall. Or she didn't hear from either at that point either. And it wasn't that, again, their families don't care or they don't want to learn, what have you. They just didn't have devices. They just didn't have connectivity. And so that's what I say to all of us, that sometimes it's not the complex things that we can do. Sometimes it's just the simple things that we can do, right? And so we bought, and I'll tell you, members of the ACP members, we provided devices, we provided laptops, we provided those tools and things that were needed. And actually we adopted 18 schools. Our companies adopted 18 schools. These were the most impoverished schools across the city of Atlanta because we wanted to ensure that those kids had a fighting chance, right? Now we've got to deal with learning loss. And so sometimes it's the life and that the child is living, that their environment they're living in. Sometimes it's their own personal health situations, but oftentimes it's those outside things that impact those poverty levels. And again, it's not because they're not smart children. They're inquisitive. They're wonderful, wonderful, wonderful children. but they just need an added help, an added helping hand. Let me say it that way.
Thank you. What advice do you have for someone who may be considering building a career in corporate DE&I?
Well, I love that. I love that. So here are the things that I would say that helped me be successful in the role when I was in the role. One, understand and know your business first and foremost. Ask the question, how does this business make money? Because the language of finance is the language of business, and you will get the investments that you need in DE&I when you can explain back to your leadership how you're going to impact the bottom line of the company. And so let me give you an example. So when I took on the role, we recognized a couple of things. We recognized, one, that we were losing African American talent at twice the rate of other talent. I knew and went and found out, well, what does it cost me to recruit one talented individual to Lockheed Martin? I knew that number. And I could say, you take that number and you multiply it by this number of people that are leaving, it's a cost to our business. Because I know what it costs for us to go out and recruit that talent again, right? So it's things like that, making sure you understand finance, the language of business, so you can talk that back to your leadership, right? When it came down to recruiting in general in Lockheed Martin, when I first got there, took on the role, we had wonderful commercials and wonderful ads across the country, right, about Lockheed Martin, what great products we had. And not in one ad or one television commercial did you ever see people. And I thought, well, gosh, if we're trying to recruit people, they should see smiling people happy to be working here. And so we totally revamped our marketing strategy. When it came down to recruiting, I took a look at, well, where are we recruiting? If we say we want to, increase our representation in the company, of course, we're recruiting at, MIT, Georgia Tech, the top technical schools in the country, right? And then I wanted to take another step back to say, well, what about the HBCUs? What about the Hispanically, serving institution, HSIs, right? Where were we? We needed to be in other places, right? And so I would say just going in, do your assessment, understand the business and how you make money, because that's the language you're going to have to talk in to get the investments that you need to have an impact. But look at all aspects of it. We looked at supplier diversity. We had to look at, where are we actually purchasing our services, our supplies as Lockheed Martin? Were we including small business? Were we including minority-owned business, women-owned businesses? And so every aspect of the business was looked at. But the key is understanding your business, what the needs of your business are, so you become a real asset to the business. But go for it. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I enjoyed the role.
Thank you so much, and that was our last question.
Well, wonderful. Well, let me just close before I turn it back to Miriam. Let me just say just a few final thoughts. We all deserve the opportunity to excel, and I think it's going to take, as I've said earlier, all of us stepping up to do small things. In this work, one person can make a difference. And I would encourage all of you, some of you are going to graduate from Georgia Tech, from the business school, you're going to start your businesses. Keep in mind people in community who may need those jobs that you're going to be creating, right? Some of you are going to go off and be, educators or what have you. Keep in mind the impact you can have on just one person in community. Just keep that in mind. I know you're all going to be successful. But again, just don't forget to bring others along in community. And as I said earlier, from my perspective, it's going to be this generation here that solved a lot of these challenges that I've shared with you today. And so as I step aside to go back to the beach I talked about at the beginning, I'm trusting that this will all be in good hands with all of you. So thank you for all you do. Congratulations on what you're doing today. Good luck on your studies. And I hope to be able to share with you again real soon. Thank you. Miriam?
Thank you, Shan, for this important discussion. We are inspired by your leadership, your commitment, and the change the Atlanta Committee for Progress has driven. You have provided many insights and experiences that will prove very important as individuals and organizations seek to make an impact in their own sphere of influence. Thank you to our audience members for taking the time to participate in this discussion. I hope you walk away from this conversation empowered and enlightened as you seek to create positive change in the business and society. Shan, thank you again for your time and for the wisdom you have shared. And this concludes our program. Have a great rest of the evening.